Hi everyone, it's Tony Tonkin here talking to you about everything. And sometimes we're talking to you about things that actually do matter. So what I want to talk to you today about is, firstly, number one, is that I haven't been doing as many of these live feeds as I told you I would. It isn't that I lied to you, it's just that I find it difficult sometimes to find the time with everything else that I'm doing. But I'm still making an effort, and I reckon that's the most important thing, is that I'm in there trying to do it every single day. And eventually I'll get to a point whereby I'll just organise my day appropriately, and I will be doing these live feeds. And, you know, at the moment I'm aware that I'm doing these live feeds to one person, namely myself. But I don't think there's anybody else that really matters. You know, that's egocentrism at its best. So here we are talking about things that do matter. And one of those things that I want to talk about today is the fact that governments establish programs or have an idea to... The reason why I'm raising this is there's one particular program that I read about this week that the South Australian government is now implementing, which is a council looking at children's well-being. Now, I guess this is on the Things That Matter YouTube site, and probably should be on the Child Protection YouTube site, so I might just do this again or send this video over, whatever. But the issue is that children... that the data relating to children is immense. We have organisations who have been gathering that data forever. And the problem is that the data is gathered, organisations, governments, whatever, gather the data, and then they tell us that this is the problem. So the problem around child protection is that there are more kids being removed than any other time in history, that Indigenous kids particularly are suffering more than anybody else in history, more Indigenous kids are being removed than anybody else in history, that kids that are in out-of-home care have the worst outcomes than anybody else. We have the data. And so they've set up this organisation that is Children's Something Council, which is about gathering this data. And my question is, why is it that we find it so important to gather information about subjects that we already know about? So when that information is gathered, what impact does it have if a government chooses to do nothing about it? And one of the problems is that we know that poverty is a major cause of children being removed. So people who live in poverty are often neglect their children in some way, and sometimes they neglect them by getting involved in drug and alcohol use. Domestic violence is prevalent. Homelessness is there. So we understand that these are the social problems. Now, if we find a way, no, I doubt whether we'll ever get rid of those problems, but if we find ways to work through those particular problems, particularly homelessness, for example, we would have less kids taken away. So that data that they think is so damn important and tells us all these facts would diminish if we found ways by which we could better care for this part of the community who is affected by drug and alcohol, DV and this stuff, and mental health. But we don't. So what value is there in gathering this data if we if governments choose to do nothing about it? And it seems to me that the problem, which is identified from this data, is not that important. What is important is telling us what the problem is. And so they think, I believe, that by at least saying that this is the problem, domestic violence is a problem in this community. 1 in 4 households suffer from domestic violence. You know, X number of kids per 1,000 are being removed. You know, that the number of notifications that are being made are more than any other notifications around child abuse ever. yet these kids are still being removed at this massive rate. And we as a society don't know what to do about it. We know, we know where this is happening. We can identify the areas in which these kids are coming from that are being removed, but we're not necessarily putting services in place to help resolve some of these problems. The result of all of this is that the problems still exist. They linger like a bad smell. And I wonder, what is in it for governments to maintain a system whereby nothing changes? Like it's almost like they're trying to maintain the status quo about those that have and those that have not. And that the people that have not can be ignored and that they don't really matter anyway, so why should we bother? And those people that have, which are the people making the decisions about the have-nots, can just motor on with their lives because none of this affects them. You know, at the end of the day, a kid who's being abused and who's put into foster care or whatever, and ripped out of a family, becomes one of the hidden datas because, what happens to that one kid is irrelevant. The fact that they're going to fail throughout most of their lives because they won't know how to have relationships, because they haven't recovered from the trauma that caused them to be taken in the first place, and because the system itself is traumatic, is of no consequence. And it means then that they don't have to fix the system. That the system can remain horrific because no one cares, and the people that should be changing it, they don't care. Governments don't care. People like the Child Protection Party and those of us work in the area, we care because we see it every single day. But governments, they don't. I think the reality is, I think the reality is that they don't want to care. Because if they did, these people would have meaning. They would, so many kids. I was speaking to one today, a kid that's in care. Completely another story, but she's smart, really smart. But the impact of being in care has been devastating to her, absolutely devastating. She's had carers that yell and scream at her and call her names and a whole host of other stuff. And she wants to come home to her mum. That's another story. But she's just a statistic. They're just statistics. So they can shovel. So it's almost like they can shovel some money into the problem. So, we know that we can increase perhaps domestic violence awareness by X number of dollars, $128 million or whatever it was a year or so ago. And it's the government seems to be doing the right thing. All right. But they're not, because the problem lies within families. And it's that we don't care enough about the mums and the dads and the kids that are in these situations to do anything about it. Instead, we see the problem as being the parent, and therefore removing the children somehow solves this problem. Now, we know that it doesn't. I'm really thinking now I should be doing this feed into the Child Protection Party, but I might do it again. Who knows? But the point is that that because we're unable to recognise what to do about the problem, we just highlight the problem. So we highlight the problem. Everybody throws their hands up in horror. Oh my God. All these people saying all these kids are being removed. But they don't care. They don't even know who these kids are. People that say, isn't it terrible that we're... So, if we're removing all these kids, there must be so many bad parents out there. And it's because there are so many bad parents that we're having to remove all these kids. Not that we need to do something about these parents to help them become better parents. Doesn't even enter into the equation, And I know that if we spend enough money on repairing what happens to families, like so many of these parents come from families where they have been abused themselves, where there's been domestic violence, drug use, and a lot of other unhelpful behaviours have gone on. And these parents have no idea as to how to parent appropriately. So isn't it appropriate then that a society decides to find ways to assist those people so that their children can remain with them and so that they can become more viable families? I mean, to me, that makes sense. To me, it's not rocket science at all. And this notion of how we view people is paramount, because if we chose to view people as possibilities, so we decided that we'd start to see the positive qualities that sit within people rather than their negatives, perhaps we might bring about some different outcomes, because people would feel hopeful rather than the way they feel at the moment, which is hopeless. And so it's incumbent upon us to ensure that we can help families, parents in particular, realise, number one, so we need to help them do what the government doesn't do. Firstly, to recognise that there's a problem, and then demonstrate to them that there's a way by which they can overcome it. At the moment, all the government does is recognise that there's a problem and will throw some money at it and hope that it will overcome it without being really committed to it. But why can't we now become committed to parents to help them parent better, deal with the issues that sit within their lives, so that their kids can be returned to them? Or, more importantly, so the kids don't get removed from them at all. So I become I become frustrated and I become angry because you just see the system repeating itself, and I see families that need to be returned. I see kids that need to be returned to their parents because whatever the reasons were for the kids being taken in the first place, they're no longer a problem. So what we do is we give up on people. That's what we do. We think the answer is to throw money at the problem and somehow that money will fix it. When I know that sometimes fixing a problem is simply understanding what's happening for a person, what brought them there in the first place, giving them a voice, go to them to figure out what needs to be done to resolve the problem. It's like a young person I spoke to who can tell you that she's going to, what she plans to do with her life and how she wants her life to live. But the department don't listen to her. They don't understand. They don't actually care about how she wants her life to be. They believe that having this kid remain in a foster home in which she doesn't want to be and she wants to run away from all the time is really helpful to the child. No, it isn't. Let's listen to the kid. If you want to find out how to solve some of these problems, the best thing to do is talk to the parents. They'll tell you. People want to be able to say to you that the reasons why they have a drug or alcohol problem is that there are other issues in their life that they haven't yet learned to deal with, and they want to find ways to do it. People don't necessarily see that some of these terrible behaviours that they have are necessarily the solution to their problems. The fact that they're unemployed, and a lot of these people want to have work. They want to find places that they can go to in which they can have more money, develop more income, provide more for their families, send their kids to better schools, have more food on the table, be able to buy better things, have a better car, better TV set. I think people want these things, but we as a society don't want to give them to them because it's like we're giving up something. It's like the middle class has to give up something. It's like we live in a bubble. And our bubble says to us that these issues don't concern us because we don't have those problems, which is stupid because, abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse of kids, emotional abuse happens everywhere. It does. And it's not dependent upon someone specifically having an alcohol problem or a drug problem or poverty. You know, there are people that just abuse other people. You know, and my most outstanding individual around any of that happens to be Donald Trump. Because as a kid, he was emotionally and psychologically abused and disregarded by his father. And look how he's turned out. Narcissistic, egomaniac, you know, doesn't listen to people, doesn't care what other people think or feel, you know, psychopathic. But that is a product, you know, and then believe it or not, even with regard to Trump, who's had all the opportunities in the world, I do feel for him. It is sad that he's chosen the paths that he's chosen and chosen to feel the way that he feels. And each one of us has an opportunity. If the people in power could decide to treat people differently, to think of them differently, if we were able to think of those people that are struggling as part of our own family, you know, if my kids are suffering and they need something, I'm always there to help them. Always. I will not judge them. I may not like sometimes what they do, but I will not judge them, but I'll always be there to help them through it. If we could think about our community in the same way, that the people that are struggling are people that we can offer a hand to, and that it doesn't mean we have to give them money, you know, because people don't necessarily want the money. They want something that's sustainable. And sometimes that is simply a belief in them, that they have the potential to be whoever they wish to be. And sometimes we just need to show them how that's possible. Rather than putting them down, denigrating them, calling them names, calling them bad parents. We can find ways by which we can work with and help them. And the sad thing is that the people that are required to do that, namely as the professionals, the social workers, the psychologists, the medical practitioners, don't see them that way. They often see them as a problem, or they see the person as the problem rather than the problem as a problem. So the problem around domestic violence is about helping the perpetrator of domestic violence to understand that behaviour is unhelpful and to find out where that behaviour came from in the first place. That's the challenge. With drug and alcohol, it's the same thing. Why is it that drugs and alcohol seem so important to some people? Because it resolves some of the emotional pain that they feel. Then where does that emotional pain come from, and how is it best that we can deal with that? So these are things that need to be considered. We need to work through them, because it's important that at the end of the day we find the solutions, rather than it just being a collection of data, which is what the government seeks. We need to be able to find the solutions to the problem as well. So thanks everybody for being with us, and thanks for joining me in Things That Matter. I'm sure that there's something about some of what I've said that matters